All right, we are back, y'all. We have author and assistant professor, Dr. Alisha Lola Jones, presenting Sheep of Another Fold, Resonances of Prince's The Rainbow Children in the Invention of B.Slade, the gospel artist formerly known as Toné.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me in this session. And I tell you, I'm so thankful for the ground that Rhonda set in previous sessions, so you can hear this as an expansion on what she offered us in her presentation. So let's start off with some music. Throughout his 2009 recording, Unspoken, the artist formerly known as Toné explores the sexual and spiritual practices that he believes are embedded in Pentecostal Christianity. Although these practices are not openly discussed either in Pentecostal churches or on contemporary gospel recordings, the above lyrics exemplify the honesty toward which Toné believes Christians should strive. In fact, this transparency about specific personal triumphs amounts to what Toné considers a form of authentic worship, especially within church contexts that place a taboo on conversation about sexual and gender identity. To worship God in spirit and in truth is thus seen as a radical exploration of matters that have particular saliency within a Christian frame. This presentation is drawn from research in my book entitled Flaming: The Peculiar Theopolitics of Fire and Desire in Black Male Gospel Performance, and encompasses a listening to the echoes of Prince's The Rainbow Children as a muse for the gospel music icon Toné's metamorphosis, reflecting on his upbringing as a rainbow child. In our 2010 interview, he described himself as following in Prince's footsteps. In many ways, Toné's album, Unspoken, can be heard as an intervention, a response to the Prince diasporan call posed in The Rainbow Children to, quote, rise, flying upon the wings of the new translation, end quote. Unspoken can be heard as a threshold between Toné's Rainbow EP, recorded as a retiree from gospel under the Toné stage name, and his recording The Children in 2011 as a gospel expat with a name change to B.Slade, signaling overt queer connections. Toné and B.Slade's combined corpus contests the portrayal of same-gender loving men as down low, secretive, deceptive, and always withholding information about who they are from their loved ones. Instead, Toné proposed that rainbow children, or queer believers, are sheep of another fold, emblematic of an abiding promise that there is hope for musical siblings on the margins. Toné's album, Unspoken, in particular, challenges the notion of authentic worship by illustrating what a new translation might sound like. And actually, let me go back to that cover so you can see it. A self-identified musical progeny of the icon Prince, he reflects on personal matters that gospel fans cannot tell. Within the song, he illustrates the parameters of authentic worship to thematically frame the other tracks as an exploration of queer body or embodied theologies. Toné's entire album incorporates, in a dense manner, various musical, gestural, and rhetorical devices such as idioms, homage, bricolage, euphemism, provocation, and other codes of communication that queer individuals, straight ally gospel enthusiasts recognize. Homosexual men's practice of decoding is a part of gay socialization in heteronormative Pentecostal constructs. As music researcher David Halperin observes, the process of learning to be gay continues to include, now as in the days before Stonewall, a process of learning how to recode heterosexual codes so as to make them serve the purposes of gay self-representation. Toné's use of multiple rhetorical devices is also consistent with what musicology scholar Samuel A. Floyd Jr. has described as musical signifying. Floyd also posits signifying as a traditional African artistic mode of psychological self-defense and self-empowerment that historically developed and intensified while Blacks coped with both white oppression and hostilities within African American communities. Signifying is, in essence, a mode of resistance, coping, commentary, and creative processing to neutralize various inter- and intra-cultural hostilities. By examining Toné's signifying on corporal imagery, we gain insight into the ways in which complexly coded testimony with regard to sexual and gender identities situates Christian believers within multiple discourses as they are coded and recoded through performance. Unspoken discourses become emblematic of a confidentiality and security that may only be sufficiently bestowed by God. It is important to note that unspoken is a play on the biblical notion of God's intimately communicated insights to a chosen individual, while they are elevated in the heavenlies. It refers to 2 Corinthians 2:4, which reads, "How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter." Wired pays homage to both house music and New Jack Swing era beats from the late 1980s, early 1990s. New Jack Swing style in particular is a combination of hip hop and contemporary R&B styles. Drum machines, clap tracks, and hardware samplers were the core instrumentation for New Jack Swing. Toné demonstrates in this album mastery and variation of iconic vocal and musical styles, such as that of Janet Jackson from Rhythm Nation, Michael Jackson, Remember the Time, and Prince in The Rainbow Children. He layers, for example, Michael Jackson's vocal style of classic ad-libs and pitched strident screams of oh and high-pitched whoo, quick-fire vocal sirens, nasal sung-spoke lyrics, and the phonological use of an aspirated audible inhalation and staccato or schwa at the end of his phrases or as a punctuation. Toné's message is also quite remarkable. It expands the possibilities of performing openly queer testimonies in gospel music as a rainbow child. The song starts with lines from traditional gospel lyrics in the first verse. Each rhyming couplet begins with "when I think of," which is usually followed by a series of staple issues for which participants are thankful. For example, the lyrics may typically be, quote, "when I think of his goodness and what he's done for me, when I think of his goodness and how he set me free, I can dance, 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 dance all night," end quote. The second verse of Wired, however, deviates from these staple issues and revises the tradition of giving thanks by adding in what a rainbow child would say of sexuality and spirituality. After the first chorus, Toné provides a music break, removing the background vocals and clap track. He allows the reverberation of the muffled, pulsing 808 bass to remain in the background that is reminiscent of house music as he yells praise for protection from STDs. According to queer performance theorist Marlon Bailey, house music is overwhelmingly perceived as a soundscape of Black Latino ballroom culture. Further, Toné's intense praise is specific about escaping consequences for unprotected sex. This exclamation seems to come out of nowhere until one goes back and listens to the very beginning of the song. The song starts with an eerie dream sequence that sounds very much like a Prince intro to a track. amidst mechanized sound effects such as the clicks from a film reel. Let's see if we can take a listen.
When I was 6 years old, I grabbed a bobby pin and I stuck it in a light socket. I should have died, but I think something happened. I think something got in. I think something took over. I think that was the moment I got wired. When I think of all the things that you done for me.
You can already hear the vocal styles at work in this track, the descriptions that I gave you earlier. The meaning within the song is contingent on who is listening. The narrator tells the listener that he became wired at the age of 6 when he stuck a bobby pin in a light socket. His illustration of a bobby pin being inserted into a light socket is a popular idiom referring to sexual intercourse. Such allusions are unexpected to a Pentecostal listener like myself. When I asked male gospel musicians in DC, they thought he was just performing a fantasy that stemmed from his traumatic experience that he started to divulge to his fan base. When I listened to the track with gay conversation partners, one of the first responses was this was a portrayal of bareback sexual practices as one of the main interpretations of this. Barebacking is casual sex without condoms that is often associated with predominantly white gay men. At the time of this album release, he was a recent divorcee who divulged that he was molested. Deploying a queer listening of the track for Toné to suggest that this early sexual experience wired, embedded, or stimulated his queer sexual appetite is even more unusual for gospel audiences. These audiences are accustomed to exercising such desire. Yet the message was a preface to what would be revealed 6 months later about his openly queer identity. Let's examine Toné's transition into an openly Black gay Pentecostal male identity to contextualize this recording. So if Prince, Michael Jackson, and or Janet Jackson and gospel music had a baby, it would be Toné. In the late 2000s, Toné began a process of affirming those queer identities have been hidden in the sanctuary worship, despite their significant contributions to the gospel music industry. Born Reverend Anthony Williams III, also known as Toné, which was active as his stage name between 1986 and 2009, thereabouts, is an emerging icon who embodies longstanding tensions and contradictions concerning queerness and Black Pentecostal Christian identity. Toné was a musician in the gospel industry and affiliated with Pentecostal Assemblies of the World Incorporated. For years, Toné and his former wife, Yvette Williams, who was formerly Yvette Graham, were known for wearing provocative garb during their performances. He incorporated female gendered materials such as boas, wigs, lace front wigs, hairpiece, creating an androgyny that was controversial or a gender nonconformity that was controversial for his gospel music fans. When he preached, Reverend Williams, though, would set aside costumes to wear traditionally male attire. In Deborah Smith Pollard's work, she wrote, quote, I see myself, quoting Toné, I see myself as kind of an anomaly because there is some element of ambiguity to my style because I will be this, and here he refers to what could be best described as West Coast sort of quote unquote thugged out attire, or I'll be radical with a mohawk, or you'll see me in a business suit. From a cultural standpoint, we are very intimidated by anything that is outside of the urbane approach, end quote. He used his attire to shock and draw attention to his message. However, many believed that his fashion-forward image was a distraction that overshadowed the worship experience. Toné was one of the most eclectic, nonconformist unpredictable, and out-of-the-box Grammy Award-winning personalities in the gospel music industry. Toné shifted his self-representation into public life as an openly gay man in what I estimate are 7 major stages that are laced with many firsts as a public figure. First, he divorced his wife in 2004 and retired from the gospel music industry in 2006. Second, he released his controversial album, The Naked Truth, in 2008, in which he shares that he was molested at 6 years old. Toné's label, Verity, was unaware that he was going to independently release the very first parental advisory CD by major gospel artists. Toné said that the president of Verity called him and asked, quote, "Does that seem like something a gospel artist would say?" End quote. He responded, quote, "I told you, I'm not a gospel artist. I'm an artist, period," end quote. From the Christian label's perspective, though, his commercial and vocational images were intertwined. He was dropped because the image portrayed in Toné's single conflicted with their listenership's views. Then he released the Rainbow EP, and the Stand in the Truth documentary, which explores same-gender love and living with HIV/AIDS. This EP was an attempt to pivot from gospel music and can be heard as an expansion upon his interpretation of Prince's call to rise and be recipients of a kept covenant as an heir of his legacy. Third, he taped an exclusive interview to be released 6 months later, where he comes out inadvertently as a gay man. In September 2009, Toné was interviewed on the Word Network by Lexi, and I'm going to advance this so we can see her, during which he disclosed that he is gay, becoming the first mainstream Black gospel artist to self-identify as an openly same-gender loving man. At the time, Toné was a pastor of Truth Apostolic Community Church in San Diego, California. He claimed that male clergy and family members molested him. As one considers his story, the praise demonstrated in Wired reflects someone who, like Toné, escaped the consequences of violent sex. His testimony underscored a frequent narrative that is quite problematic in Black churches and gospel circles that ties one's disclosure of their queer sexual orientation to some sort of sexual violation almost exclusively. It's rare that people speak of their sexual or queer sexual orientation as something that developed naturally. Fourth, or next, in the same month, he recorded Unspoken. After that, he changed his brand from Toné, which was associated with gospel performance, to B.Slade, which is short for Brian Slade, a reference to the name of the lead bisexual, gender nonconforming glam rock character in the movie Velvet Goldmine. This move would broaden his audience. For this talk, though, I will focus on the period between the Unspoken recording completion and the interview release. He then dropped a compilation mixtape entitled The Children. Let me see if I can find that image, in which he sings that we should be known by our love and that presumably queer believers are sheep of another fold. However, since its release, the album has been pulled from distribution on all streaming platforms where it was released, even though it is one of the earliest 21st century welcoming and affirming albums deploying a rainbow by a well-known gospel artist. So let's return to the initial song, Wired, as a demonstration of transparent worship leadership through disclosure of potentially stigmatizing information such as one's HIV/AIDS status. And in the interest of time, I just want to say that for many folks hearing Wired, they may say, well, is there a precedent for talking about things like STDs and gospel music? And I would offer, actually, yes. There are many ways gospel musicians have tackled the subject using various devices. I'll share with you one of the iconic ways. Let Me Advance Forward. And it's by Bishop Yvette Flunder. I'm sure if I start to play it, many of you would recognize the groove.
Tragedies are commonplace. All kinds of diseases are slipping away. The economy's down. People can't get enough pay. As for me, all I can say is thank you, Lord, you put on me.
For any of you who aspire to gospel music ministry, this groove immediately sends people up. Bishop Yvette Flunder is one of the most famous openly lesbian gospel music artists and happened to be the pastor to the late, great Sylvester James, eulogizing or officiating Sylvester James' funeral proceedings. And this song was released shortly after Sylvester James's death. In closing, within this talk, I've considered the extent to which Toné takes up Prince's call to rise by negotiating queerness and worship in spirit and in truth. Toné's self-disclosure of potentially stigmatizing information in a compulsory heteronormative context opens up possibilities within Pentecostal theological imagination, performance, and discussion. Science has been imposed upon participants in the past whose progressive Black Pentecostal sexuality extended beyond traditional beliefs. Such expansive expressions of sexuality are held as matters with which one struggles and from which one should be set free. Discussion of the myriad sexual experiences has been interpreted as obscenity in many settings, unfitting a minister of the gospel like Reverend Williams, also known now as B.Slade. Yet silence in place of transparency has cultivated a bad faith among people who claim to live leading other believers through truth and power, through the truth and power of their testimony. Thank you, guys.
Well, Alisha, I really loved your presentation. It was amazing. I love the music. And I knew about B.Slade, but to be honest, and I knew about Toné, but I didn't realize they were the same person. I can't believe that. When I saw your abstract for your presentation, I was like, oh my God.
Can I tell you a little bit more? He has more than one stage. He has more than two stage names too.
Oh, wow. Wow. So what are some of his other stage names?
I can't think of, they're somewhere in my footnotes.
Okay. No, don't worry about it.
But I will say that matters because he uses them depending on the genre and the instrument he's playing. Mm-hmm. That's how he gives credit to himself.
Mm. That's incredible. So we do have a few moments for question and answers from Alisha's amazing presentation. Please put them in the Q&A. Yay! So let's put Rakabash. You could always come through. Any thoughts on what Prince's impression would have been of Toné's music and him as a person?
You know, I wish I could dig down into this, and I would love to circle back and ask Toné, because in many ways, since he let us into his story, he's actually been able to work with his icons and tribute his icons. So I'd be curious to see the extent to which he worked with Prince. He's worked with Janet, he's worked with the Jackson family and written for them. I would have to do even more digging to see if there was a concrete collaboration. And I hope to do that the next time we chat. But he's making his rounds. He's worked with Patti LaBelle, got his Grammy note with Snoop. But he said specifically in my interview with him that he views himself as taking taking the baton, to borrow from Rhonda's presentation or Aisha's presentation. He's taken up the musical baton of a Prince who was also a multi-instrumentalist. And so in many ways, he gestures towards him in his being, and I'll see if there was an actual connection explicitly between the two.
Any songs that you feel are particularly Prince influenced?
Oh, so I feel like a lot of his output, mind you, he puts out like an EP every 4 months. And a robust EP. As a producer, this is how he shows his prowess. But on that particular album, I would direct you toward Glory, where he really, to me, gestures not only to a continuation of the Rainbow Children, but also to Prince's come. Really solidifying the explicit erotic orgasmic connotations of transcendence, feeling the spirit descend and move upon the body.
I love Prince's Come, so I'm so happy that you mentioned that because it's an album that doesn't get talked about enough. There's one more question. We have time for one more question. Actually, there's so many great questions coming in. I want to ask this one. How does the gospel music community tend to view Toné now?
So this is what I think is the beauty of Toné's story, or B.Slade's story. Now he does not want to be associated with being a gospel artist, though he is a worship leader at one of the major churches on the West Coast, City of Refuge. Bishop Noel Jones is a pastor. He's Grace Jones's brother. So I think he's very intentional about his affiliations. I will say that he still remains one of the most virtuosic, musically competent individuals in the industry, even though he does not want to be referred as a gospel music artist. Theologically, of course, he really does represent the tensions. And I spend about 2 chapters on him out of 8 because of the conversations that he generates. But there is no arguing his musical ability.
Okay, I'm going to slide one question in here. Can you also talk a little about the similarities in fashion/style? Absolutely.
He explicitly makes that connection between Prince as well as Michael Jackson. In his use of anywhere from heels, in his ability to move across various female gendered pieces of attire. He does it all the time. He for a bit wore his hair short, cut like Prince did during those Maite days. And it's very versatile in his style. He wears heels. I mean, there's just so much there visually to grapple with.
So thank you so much, Alisha. Your presentation again, I'm not just saying this just to pat you on the back. It was incredible. Thank you so much for, you sharing that with us today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much again, Alisha.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Stay connected.